Welcome, everybody, to Edge of the Rabbit Hole here on Connecting the Universe. I'm author and researcher Mike Ricksecker. With me, as always, my co-host is Victoria Mundae. And down in the chat room, Victoria moderating the chat. We have a fantastic show coming up for you today. Dr. Simeon Hein is with us. He's a former university professor in statistics and research methods. Victoria already has the giggles, which is great.
No, Alina is in the chat, not Victoria.
Did I say Victoria's in the chat?
I usually am everywhere, but that's okay. No, it's Alina.
That's true. And Alina moderating the chat. Do I need to redo this whole thing? No, we're fine.
Take two.
In any case, Dr. Hein here is, we're really looking forward to talking with him. He covers the gamut of different topics from crop circles, supernatural activity, the multiverse, remote viewing, all of these different topics. And Simeon, I want to start with your origins, discovering here that you had a UFO experience when you were very young. That kind of seems like it kind of set you up for going down this path, which is in academia, but still you've always been open-minded to all of this activity. So can you tell us a little bit about this?
Yeah, I talk about that story a lot, and it occurred to me when I was talking to someone 2 days ago, a high school a friend from actually elementary school back in New York a few days ago, that there was something before that UFO sighting. Is my dad took me into work one day for like the Bring Your Kid Day, and he worked in Manhattan, and we took the train in, from the suburbs, and he just introduced me to his colleagues, and one of them said, "Hey, you want to see my strange files?" And he opened up his file cabinet and he goes, "This is where I keep all of my files of weird things." And there were all these topics, and I'm only like,
he had like his own X-Files drawer.
Exactly. This is in the 60s. Guys, we're talking the late 60s or early 70s. I mean, I think it might have been 8 or 9 or 10 or something. I remember looking, one of them was the Texas blob. It was some sort of strange fungus. He had the articles about that. And I remember there were other files. He said, and look, I have a different file for each of these different topics. And I can't remember specifically what was there, but it was a long time ago, the 60s. But I'm sure there were UFOs and other topics. So maybe it started then. But because we're affected by people in ways that we don't even remember of being interested in things. And then you kind of wonder as a little kid, like, well, what was the Texas blob? I mean, seriously, nobody really knew. The sighting with my mom happened a couple of years later in the Everglades when she took us bird watching. And she was an avid bird watcher. And we went down there to the Everglades. If you've been down there, I mean, I just remember it being this vast, swampy, forested area, and there wasn't anyone else out there when we were there. It was like we had the whole place for ourselves. And all of a sudden I'm looking like, I just look up and there's like this big thing over us, maybe right below the clouds. So that's maybe, I don't know where the clouds are, like 10,000 feet or something. So maybe we're talking about 2 miles up. It looked as big as a full moon. So I said to my mom, "Hey, Mom, look at the moon. Look at the green moon. It was green."
Wow.
And she said, yeah, kid. And she went back to looking. She's looking way out there, whatever this herons are out there, whatever sort of swamp birds, you get in the Everglades. And I said, "No, Mom, it's over there." And she looks up and she goes, "Sim, it's a UFO." And we both had binoculars. And this thing, I'll tell you what was weird about it, and still to this day, it was blurry, but it was focused on the inside, but the edges were blurry.
Okay.
Oh, wow.
Interesting.
Yeah, it looked amorphous, like it wasn't as sharp as the moon because it was over there. It was an amorphous green, perfectly circular object with very defined dots underneath on the bottom side. And the reason I could see that is we had good bird watching binoculars, 10 power birding binoculars. So you could see every little detail of the underside of this craft. And I still to this day remember that strange feeling of looking at something that even in your little 12-year-old mind, you knew didn't belong there. It just had this feeling like it shouldn't be there. And I can't put it any other way. It just felt like it didn't feel human.
So
it had this coldness to it, and it had this seriousness and an intensity that I couldn't describe. As soon as we looked at it, by the way, within about 5 seconds, the dots formed a Z. If you would connect all the dots, it would have made a Z. And you could see structure on the bottom. And it
mhm.
wasn't any structure I'd ever seen before. It looked like a flying saucer with amorphous green edge. And it picked up speed. It just started moving and moving. It didn't accelerate like anything I'd ever seen before. It wasn't like a jet or something, which sort of takes a little time to accelerate. It just like started moving from nothing into a cloud. It just went straight into a cloud.
Wow.
The next cloud over there. And I'm thinking, well, maybe it was like a rocket test. You know, we're not far from Cape Canaveral, but
True.
rockets don't hover. And
Not like that, no.
they don't have dots on them like that. They would be falling if it was a failed rocket test. You'd see things coming down. You'd see a smoke trail. Now, this was weird. So we go to the Ranger talk. We sit down in the front row. The people next, Mom said, we just saw a UFO. People said, yeah, we saw it too. We saw it. I remember this guy said, it came out of a cloud. I said, we saw it go into a cloud. He saw it come out of a cloud. The Ranger opens the Ranger talk, you know, at those amphitheaters, they have it. She said, anybody see anything interesting today? And my mom says, we saw a UFO. And she goes, oh, that's interesting. Did anybody else see anything? So, and there's a power. The power goes out, by the way, while we're there.
Oh,
There's
okay.
there's no power. We can't do this. We're talking because there's no slideshow. We thought, yeah, the UFO knocked the power out. You see, so we went up again as the thing ended early because there's no power. It's pitch black. You know, crickets are
Mhm.
chirping out there in the amphitheater, totally dark. And my mom says, no, we really didn't. She goes, well, you know, you probably saw a weather balloon or I mean, something like that. She just didn't want to talk
I
about it.
always say it's a weather balloon.
Well, to my little
night.
mind back then, I started wondering how come she didn't want to talk about it. I
Right.
mean, I didn't know about UFO conspiracies. I'm 12. It's like 1970.
Yeah,
It's
people
right
didn't talk
after
about it so much
Project
back.
Blue Book. And I'm thinking, well, I know my mom, we really did see something. Nope, no. So this is where this kind of all starts for me is I saw the cover up right there at that
Yeah.
national park.
So let me ask you this: that blurriness, that kind of amorphous feel to it. Do you think that was some sort of energy field, maybe a magnetic field? Could it have been? We've had discussions before on this show and connecting the universe about the idea of things moving in and out of different dimensions. Could it have been related to something like that? What do you think that was?
So now that I've studied all these different related topics, and you get this around Bigfoot, you get it
Mhm.
around cryptids, UFOs, ghosts, and cold fusion, now known as LEN or low energy nuclear reaction. Reactors are notoriously hard to photograph. They researchers say they look blurry
Yeah.
to the eye in the photo. What we think that is now, and Dr. Hal Puthoff gave us a lecture about it a couple of years ago in Vegas at the SSE IRVA meetings. It seems to be that there's certain life forms and materials that have what we call oscillating permittivity, and permittivity and permeability being the two factors that determine the speed of light. Basically,
Oh, we've got visuals. All right.
yeah, because this is really what I think it comes down to, and that's why it's on my bulletin board.
Okay.
Permittivity being the first DU, and then permeability being E, and the magnetic component of space. And those are usually fixed around us. Materials have varying degrees of resistance to magnetic or electric fields, which is what permeability and permittivity are. But it does seem that the UFOs are made of materials that oscillate in permittivity, even have what's called double neg materials, negative permittivity, negative permeability, which we don't see normally in materials around us. These are called metamaterials. They modify the wavelength of electromagnetic frequencies. So if they're oscillating, to us, it's not going to look right. To our equipment, to our eyes, it's not going to be fixed because the speed of light is going to be now oscillating, and it's literally going to look blurry. You've all seen that demonstration where you put a straw in water and it looks bent. down below the water. That's because the permittivity of water is different than the permittivity of air. So the light is bent a little bit, but it's not oscillating. It just looks that way because it's fixed. But imagine if that permittivity was oscillating, it would look like the straw was going back and forth, back and forth. And what would it end up looking like? Blurry. So this is my view of why these objects and life forms. One of the things that's always made me wonder is not just that the pictures of Bigfoot are blurry and cryptids. People literally say, like, look at Stan Gordon's books, for example, the researcher from Pennsylvania, Silent Invasion, so forth. People say the creature looked blurry.
Right.
And so I think let's just agree it's not because of shaky hands or anything. It could be, but that's not the only explanation. The explanation is that they look blurry because they are blurry. That's one of Tom DeLonge's tweets from a number of years ago.
Yeah.
And
Well, I think a lot of it comes down to, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, I think a lot of it comes down to, you know, the way that our eyes perceive the world and take in light. We only see within a very narrow band of that spectrum. And so what's coming back to us and information is coming back to us is very, very limited as to, you know, compared to everything else that's around us.
No, it's very limited, but objects that we're used to almost entirely have fixed, you know, physics constants. And if biological life forms or the technology is oscillating those frequencies at a rapid scale, they're going to appear blurry to us. And that is my feeling about it. Now, if someone has another explanation, hey, I'm open to it, but that seems to me, because you look at these Bigfoot photos a lot and you look at these ghost photos and, you know, there's something really weird about them. They just look strange. That's the only way I can put it. Something doesn't work. Something's not right there. They don't quite look like they belong in our reality. The shapes are a little off. And to me, that I think it's explained by this, which I think is interesting, just this permittivity, the basic structure of the speed of light. What that suggests, Mike, is that the speed of light is variable. That's another idea we were taught. We were taught it's fixed. It's fixed when it propagates in a certain material, but there's nothing to say that the speed can't change if those fundamental physics constants are changing. The speed of light is going to change too. And I want to say one more thing about it. Einstein proposed this in 1907. And again, in 1911, there are two papers you can read where he suggests that the speed of light was variable. But he was so much on the track with already just establishing the speed of light in general relativity theory. He suggested that gravitational mass could affect the speed of light as it comes across the big arc of the universe. But he did suggest it 100 years ago. So this isn't coming out of left field. Einstein suggested this too. What we now believe is that you could have a structured variation oscillation. You get the idea.
Yeah, absolutely. Go ahead, Victoria.
Okay, so are you saying that possibly, like, when we're seeing orbs or cryptids or ghosts or anything, we're actually seeing like an energy rift or a rift in time, and that's why certain people are seeing things and other people will be looking and they won't see it?
Yes, and Hal called it space-time metric engineering. Space-time metric engineering, as if it could be engineered by non-human intelligence. You guys know the terminology is changing as Congress gets up to speed on this.
Right.
New terms have been invented that are in these. It's in the NDAA, the National Defense Authorization Act for next year. They work on it every year. It's already another Schumer amendment in there about NHI, and that they won't fund any. The Senate will no longer fund any NHI special access programs if it's hidden from Congress. So NHI knows how to do this, and I think that is why those things do look blurry. You're raising a really good point. The structure of space-time has changed. I mean, that is why people have these space-time slips in around these areas and certain hotspots, portal areas. I think the structure of space-time is variable too. And that's where this all leads to.
But wouldn't you want it to be variable? Like if you're going to go through a wormhole or a portal or something, you don't want to go like you're walking. You want to go like you're in an elevator and zip on through.
Exactly.
Okay.
So someone's figured this out. And I think it's exciting and a lot of fun. And I think the general public should know about this. Is you could go out on a beautiful day wherever you are. Well, it's not so beautiful in some parts of the country. You guys got a hurricane coming up, not too far from you, if I'm not mistaken, coming up the coast. You could go out and encounter one of these life forms, one of these objects. It's going to throw your mind for a loop. And I think this is part of the reason people have missing time around cryptids, around orbs. People have had this around orbs. All of a sudden, a couple hours go by, but not in the normal way that you would imagine, because you'd feel sore if you stood in the same place for a couple hours and came back to consciousness if you've been standing all the time, right? People report they don't feel like their muscles don't feel like they were there for a couple hours, but their watch says they were, as if they just blinked through to another time. I mean, I know that sounds really out there, like science fiction, Mike, or something.
And not at all, because I've written an entire book on time travel that's right back here. So you're touching on a lot of my work here, which is great. What's that?
Oh, I've lost time before.
Yeah.
Mike's written a book. I've lost time. So
let me ask you this.
I'm happy to hear about it. I'm happy to hear about it.
Yeah, let me ask you about this. I have a whole theory. It's called stack time theory. We don't need to get into all of that, but the idea that as we have these different shifting frequencies, that 2 moments in time can, for a brief moment, or maybe an extended moment. You hear about some of these different extended time slips, like the Versailles time slips and some of these others, but some just seem to be like a few seconds or a minute. But it's 2 of those moments are essentially syncing up at the same frequency for a little bit, and so that's why we're having these 2 moments in time kind of bleed into each other. And so is that kind of where you're headed with this? Is that you have these varying frequencies of these different moments and they're crossing into each other?
Yes, it could be something like that. And it also can be that you're going back to a frequency that doesn't exist anymore in our reality, and you experience what's called a time slip.
Yeah.
So you're juncturing back with objects, people, historical settings. Tim Schwartz has written about this. I wrote about this in Dark Matter Monsters, a friend of mine who had this experience in a crop circle. I got to say one thing here, guys. Until you have some sort of idea of why something could happen. Oh, thanks. Yeah.
Yeah.
Until you have some idea that this is possible, you could experience it yourself and not remember it, because there's no box in your mind to put it in. And as a sociologist, that's my training. This makes a difference. You won't remember things that you don't really understand how it could have happened. You'll just forget about it because you won't want to talk about it to people. You won't imagine how many of these encounters people don't want to talk about because it's scary. There's a fear of ostracism, or people in the military of some sort of retribution from your superiors at promotion time. So there's a lot of reasons people have these experiences, but they don't really want to talk about it or could forget about it. I have to say, in that newer movie, Bigfoot Revealed.
Yeah, I totally understand from that. I was in the Air Force for several years, and there were things that happened to us when I was in Alaska. And yeah, you didn't want to talk about it because you didn't want to find yourself down at mental health and lose your security clearance. So yeah,
right.
I totally understand that. Yeah.
This newer movie, a flashy movie, Bigfoot Revealed. I was in the sequel called Paranormal Bigfoot, but there was those guys from Renaissance Productions did a first one. You can see it on YouTube. I think it's still free on YouTube, if I'm not mistaken. The final part of the show is from psychological professionals who say that we all delete experiences every day because our survival, mechanisms, our consciousness, our brain, they're tough. They do push things out of the way that don't really serve your purpose. And so I'm answering your question, Mike, in a kind of roundabout way.
Sure.
Like I like to do, is we could have these experiences and not remember them. But in this one I'm referring to, Ron felt like he's in this circle. It's the Avebury 1995 sort of snake-like eating his tail formation. And he goes out to get more film, and he encounters people speaking like a very old type of English. They're dressed in like this Celtic garb. They look a little smaller than modern people. They just feel like they're from another time. And he goes, oh, that's weird. He goes to the car, gets the film, comes back, and he feels like he's been gone for like 45 minutes to an hour by the time he gets back. And they say back in the circle, we've only been gone 5 minutes.
Right.
So that is sort of typical of a time slip. I've had other friends who've experienced this sort of thing, but it is a real experience. It happens to groups of people. You encounter people from another time. The music is not from our era anymore. It's a couple decades ago or 100 years. People have experienced this. Tourists, they get off at Palace of Versailles or somewhere in Europe, and they say, wow, these people are dressed like in costumes or something, but the whole thing, they begin to realize it's real, and all of a sudden they snap back. I remember this case of a policeman chasing this kid in London, and he said the kid relayed the experience, and the cop said it happened. He saw the kid just vanish in front of his eyes. So these things do happen. I mean, no one ever told you about this, but it's something to watch out for. I haven't experienced it, but I've spoken to enough people who have. Oh, one more case. This gets back to what we're talking about, physics, permittivity. I was teaching RV to a guy in Boulder, and he told me that he was crossing the street once, Boulder, Colorado. All of a sudden, everything went back to like 150 years ago, horse carts, barns. It just doesn't look right.
Right.
Where it gets to the other side of the street, it comes back again. So.
Yeah, you hear fascinating stories like that quite often, really. I mean, more often than we really give recognition for. So, like at Gettysburg, people think that they're watching a reenactment of some battle. They go to the visitor center, and they tell the staff there, "Oh, you had a really great reenactment out there today." Like, we didn't have a reenactment.
Right on Gettysburg.
No, that's happened to me.
My dad used to take us down to the Civil War battlefields all the time, so we wouldn't forget what had happened in this country.
Yeah.
I don't remember experiencing anything quite like that, but you do hear stories, Mike, right? Where they encounter someone dressed in perfectly the uniform of the time. And when they do some inquiry, the locals say, oh, that's the ghost. That's this ghost that keeps showing, because other people have experienced it. It's often at night, dark nights, and you come around the bend and there's this Civil War soldier. You've heard these stories too.
Yeah, and absolutely.
There's a consistency to it. When they take pictures of it, they often turn out blurry.
Yeah, blurry or unrecognizable, but
or just dark.
And a lot of times I don't think that they're really ghosts at all, or we have this idea of like a residual haunt energy that's playing back, and maybe some of it is, but I do believe that many of these are time slips, and we're actually getting a glimpse of that moment in time and actually seeing it play out in front of us, because there are other stories that you hear where there's an interactive element between the person, a modern person that's having the moment, and the person from the past, or sometimes even the future, which is really fascinating. So yeah, there's some sort of bleed over here between times, from, as it were, from time to time.
Yeah, bleed through. I mean, you mentioned some sort of stack theory of reality, something like that. That there's bleed through between.
Well, that gets into the different, and we want to talk to you about your ideas. I mean, that's my whole idea about, take Einstein's idea of the block universe and kind of build up from that of, all time is here, all time is concurrent, and anything, with time being the fourth dimension, and from like fifth, sixth, seventh dimension onward, all time would be concurrent. So where you're sitting, where I'm sitting, everything that has happened, is happening, will happen, is all right there. And I liken to each of those moments being like a photograph in a large stack of photographs, each of those photographs having a basically like a frequency signature. And sometimes but the frequencies can change from time to time, and they kind of, maybe that oscillation that you're talking about, and sometimes those moments will hit the same frequency, and you'll get that bleed over. You'll see and be able to interact with those other moments. So it's kind of the real quick, down and dirty explanation of it.
Yes, and people who feel like they've been on UFOs report some of these experiences of being taken back and shown their childhood. Not on a screen, like taken back to rural Nebraska or somewhere where they grew up. and things like this. And so it would suggest that space and time are more malleable than we as humans living around this time in 2024 experiencing it for the most part. But I mean, we've all had those experiences a little bit from time to time, if not at least in dreams at night, where
Yes.
sometimes they feel very real, and you get information that's, we say veridical, like you can act on it. It could be verified later.
Yeah.
So
When you have like a premonition or something like that within a dream. Yeah.
yeah, I was just talking to someone a few minutes ago in my RV class who's knew someone whose mom had a dream about something, and it happened a couple of days later. Exactly, going to church, someone coming up to you, tell you something exactly, a certain event, and that's exactly what happened a couple of days later. So it leads you to wonder, and we've all had that sort of sense sometimes of things happening, premonitions. It leads you to wonder, Mike, if there's a, if the way reality works is there's a simultaneity to all these realities, and there's something about our perception that strings it into the sequence. But that's not the way it's ultimately happening. It's more like there's just a whole range of realities, and they're not totally parallel. They're interacting a little bit, and you get some of that bleed through, those premonitions, those dreams about things. So I think people have experience of it. It's just when you wake up every day, it's very easy to dismiss that because that's what we've been taught, is
Right.
it's just a dream. But sometimes it turns out to be real.
Absolutely.
Can I redirect in another way, but it's kind of the same way a little? You do remote viewing, correct?
Yep.
Okay. Can you remote view situations that happened in the past?
Sure. Yep.
Have you ever tried doing that with like crop circles to see who actually and how they were actually being made? That's my first question. And if they all have some sort of electromagnetic field to it, well, no, you already answered that. That'd be good on your, because we're actually seeing about a rift in time. And then I wanted to ask you about your music, because I loved it. What is that? Oh yeah,
Crop
that's
circles.
cool. I love this. Okay, well, my screen's very tiny, but
This
you have
is-
music called Opening
Yeah.
Skies. Have you ever played any of that? And I'm assuming you did like CE5 or whatever is commonly referred to as CE5. Have you ever used any of your own music to try and make any sort of contact with extraterrestrials? That's it.
You gave them a whole list there.
Yes. So starting with your last question first, as they say.
Okay.
um,
The one you remember.
yeah,
Your music is great. It's very,
I'm a little,
I love it.
Yeah. So I think there's a lot we need to learn about sound.
Yes.
Because I've always noticed at certain concerts, and sometimes when I'm playing, that you sort of hook into this feedback, a loop of energy where it feels like something's really building up that's more than the sum of the parts. And I'm sure you've all been to concerts, people watching, where there was something happening that really seemed non-ordinary, almost paranormal. And I think that there's a way to create coherent sound that is able to tap into electromagnetic, even quantum effects that they're not something you would normally expect. People in the cold fusion, low energy nuclear reaction area have written about this. Dmitry Zamolov and others, who I've seen their research recently in their published papers about creating coherent sound through something called cavitation, where you use frequencies to shake up a liquid and it creates bubbles and they collapse. And when they collapse, they create a lot of energy. And it seems to shake up the energy structure down to a quantum level where you're actually liberating energy through sound. And that's what I think is going on in these different phenomena. I'm not sure I was able to achieve that in a crop circle. Part of the reason is you're in some farmer's field and it's not like they want you there necessarily. In the UK, they would put up collection boxes and stuff, but it's not like you could spend forever in there. We've made our own over time. I have some of the wheat from some of the circles where we've made some. And for the most part, we've paid farmers and so forth to use their fields. So, yes, I do play guitar, and thanks for mentioning that. I think
It's
energy is transmutable. So, whatever level you come into it, you can create coherency. And
mhm.
that seems to be the secret to making matter malleable, to tapping into extra energy, to creating self perpetuating feedback loops. I think that Sasquatch, Bigfoot do this with their sound and their voices. And the reason I believe that is if you listen to the witnesses, they say that the sound was the loudest thing they ever heard, or the loudest animal they've ever heard, or louder than a freight train, or like even louder than a rock concert right in front of the speakers. And yet someone 100 feet away didn't hear it in the same campground.
Hmm.
That is
is
not
it
ordinary sound. That's not
is it
ordinary
be,
sound. So
sorry, is it because of their personal resonance that they're actually picking up on this? Like somebody, let's say Mike was standing next to me and he's like, what the heck are you talking about, Victoria? I don't hear anything. Would it be just because we're picking up on different frequencies?
Oh, wow. Sorry, did you say something?
what? No.
Did you read your email from your birthday, Mike?
Huh? What email?
The one at 10:53.
Yeah,
Anyway,
go ahead.
I think it's that they're able to modulate sound with the same coherency that a laser has. In the same way you could point a laser in a certain direction and someone from the side won't see it unless there's a lot of dust. It's directional like a laser because the amplitudes of the waves are stacking on each other to create a very intense frequency, and it's not spreading out, which is weird for sound because normally sound,
yeah.
it's pressure related, it spreads out like a scalar, it's just all directions, it's non-directional. But Sasquatch cryptids seem to be able to create directional sound very similar to a laser in the direction that we call coherent matter. And that's where these orbs come from, is this sort of coherency. They get to the same frequency. The Air Force, looked into this. Lockheed Martin has a patent in coherent matter wave beams, and they show their particular device for getting all these electrons to be at the same frequency and the same temperature, monochromaticity. So that's the area what we're talking about here. And it does seem that you could do it with sound. And sometimes when I'm playing an acoustic guitar, it feels like I've reached that point where I'm not putting any effort into it. It feels like I'm generating more energy from the process than I'm required. And I can't prove that, but it does seem that the audience can hear that.
Mhm.
And, we were talking about my first experience with UFO. My first concert ever was Led Zeppelin in Madison Square Garden in 1977. My brother took me. I was 14 years old. And that seemed almost paranormal, just the way that four guys could generate that much, not just sound, enthusiasm from
Yeah.
20,000 people. That got me wondering too, what was a power there? And it didn't come from amplification. It came from some sort of focus. Even John Paul Jones said the first practice they ever had together as a band, there was like something magical about it. They all just came together. So I think musicians experience this in a band. And I think when you feel a band playing like that, it's a tangible feeling that you could feel in your body, right? It's a little different than just listening to a record.
No, I read something some years ago that sometimes music will produce like when you're really I guess moved by it, something that really resonates with you, that they've actually been able to detect like a light blue glow across your skin. I'll have to dig up that article again. It was really a fascinating read. Yeah.
That's what I was going to ask.
You mentioned that because I did a YouTube video about that blue glow.
Oh, did you? Okay.
Yeah, just a couple of weeks ago.
Oh, great.
Oh.
And
so
it seems to show up around cryptids, UFOs. I remember hearing a story from someone, Jim Meyer, at the Sasquatch Outpost in Bailey, Colorado, when I went to his Bigfoot Adventure weekend. He was driving us back at night from this area where they'd had a lot of activity. And he mentioned this case where these hunters in Pennsylvania had said on the way up from the museum, we had something happen because we never told anyone before, but there was like this crashing sound coming through the forest. It sounded like a big tractor, the typical Bigfoot sound. However they make that, we don't know if they're making that sound or if they're actually crunching things up. But when it finally got right in front of them, they had all their weapons raised with the lights so they could light it up with this. The light flashlights attached to their scope and the laser finders. There wasn't anything ever but a blue mist. So that seems to be a part and parcel. So you're saying there's an article that says that this
I can dig that up and send your way. It was probably a good 8 years ago that I came across that article.
And these orbs have certain colors. It's part of the process of this energy shifting frequencies that you get these colors. I think these creatures know how to do it, but you certainly get it around UFOs. You get that sort of blue glow, and it's not necessarily, you push it too far, people get radiation burns. I interviewed Gary once from Minot, who was a missile security guard, and they saw something take off next to it. They were ordered to go out to this silo to see what's setting off the alarms. And that thing, he said, it looked bluish. It was straight up as it left the silo, and they were burned. Everything on the right side of the security alert team truck was burned.
Wow.
Including their M16s. And he had injuries. He even had growths on his body on the right side. So I just want to caution people, you don't just want to run to the blue light, because it could be ionizing radiation. It could be dangerous. We found this around cold fusion LENR reactors. Just a word of caution, people that have experimented with cavitation and pushed it too far have gotten cancer. So just be careful with it. Yeah, go ahead. I didn't want to interrupt you.
Sorry. Okay, so back to the musicians.
Yeah.
Are they creating a sphere of influence, basically, to use Jim, what's his name, Pennison's term, that it's a bubble, that things happen inside this bubble and everyone else around is oblivious, basically?
Well, it can feel like that. And maybe that's what's going on. Certainly crowds of people in groups, protesters, can experience that feeling within their protest area. It can feel kind of like a party, right? Like the rules of reality have changed. And I read an article.
There's a euphoria.
Like what?
Yeah, there's a euphoria.
Right. So, and I read this article in New Scientist that police haven't been trained to deal with this, is that the people that you're seeing as the bad guys or the protesters that need to be controlled, on their side of the area, they're feeling a sense of euphoria, like people feel at concerts. I personally think that's a frequency-based experience, a type of coherency, a synchronicity, right? What we're talking about, coherent matter. And this article said that police should not just attack them. They should realize you're dealing with a group, a community that's at a certain, didn't say this, but a frequency that to them feels really good. So it's not that they're just, for them, it's order. From the point of view of the police, it's disorder, right? And I think, we've all seen this at concerts and experienced this. So yeah, I think there are degrees of coherency. You even get to the point where everyone's doing the wave, around the stadium. You get these spontaneous effects that are reminiscent of the Bose-Einstein condensate, which, back in the 90s had to be created at very cold temperatures so that all the particles become just the same particle and become one wave. And the particle just becomes this wave-like thing, at least in the Bose-Einstein condensate. But I think it happens, and that's what the Lockheed Martin patent was about, Mike, is they said we can do this at room temperature, not just, they mentioned the Bose-Einstein condensate, that we could do this at room temperature with any particle. That's what the patent was about. That's what ball lightning is. Orbs are part of that family of ball lightning, of coherency. It's another talk, how it actually forms, what creates that coherency. But no, to answer your question, I think that's what we're doing. You can create it through music. You can create it through light. Any sort of coherent energy will create that frequency. And I think for a lot of us, the interest is, could we create energy this way, self-sustaining energy in our homes, so that we wouldn't be reliant on this outdated grid that we're all using here in the US, at least, which, is very hard to improve, costs billions of dollars. It's even hard to hook up solar and wind to it because it doesn't have much more capacity, right? Isn't that the challenge? You can't hook up much. I've been in campgrounds where they won't let electric cars. They say we
because
don't
they'll
have
just drain it. Yeah.
we don't have the electrical capacity. So how about if we could generate that right at the point where we needed it through this coherency with these feedback? I mean, this is what people are working on right now. This is what Leonard's about. And we'll get there someday. It's about coherent matter and generating a stable reaction that sustains and taps into those, what some people call quantum vacuum currents. It's currents of electricity straight from the quantum vacuum. It totally fits with what Paul Dirac, the physicist, said could happen. And he's the one who predicted antimatter years before anyone thought such a thing was possible. It just came out of his math equations. I think we can do it again at a macroscopic scale. But I think, to answer your question, it definitely relates to any sort of energy, coherent energy source. My energy source of choice is an acoustic guitar, just because that is, I don't even need to plug it in to get that feeling and to create it for my audience too. So,
okay.
yeah.
And
One
speaking
more.
of, hang on real quick. Speaking of, Tom McNicholas, $5 super chat says, my first concert was BTO, so I'm taking care of business. So thank you, Tom, for the $5 super chat.
I heard about them in music history. Just kidding.
Yeah.
Okay. So you were saying that you need a coherent, stable reaction to be sustained.
Right.
To produce
It's gotta be
energy?
like a laser or a maser microwave
Oh,
equivalent.
That was
of
the
laser.
other thing I was going to ask you about masers too. This is kind of weird. My little voice just told me this. Do you think people were trying to experiment with that before and it was not stable? And that's what created, and I hate to say it, spontaneous human combustion, because we just don't
Right.
hear about that anymore.
Exactly right. Exactly right. That's what spontaneous
I'm done.
combustion is. It's a coherency. It's what
I'm
could
done.
happen to all of us. I don't know why it happens to certain people, or they're all at the same frequency, and the whole thing is just literally zapped out of existence. That's why the things around them aren't on fire. It's not a temperature related thing. It's a frequency where they just became a wave, and all the particles just disappeared into one waveform. And
But
that
it just
seems to
doesn't
be
happen. Yeah.
I don't know exactly why it happens, but it's a state of nature. So just to review physics for a second, the most common state of matter in the universe is plasmas. Aurora borealis, nebulas, lightning, neon signs, fluorescent light bulbs are all plasmas. We've all experienced this, but they're not self-sustaining, and they don't have any tangibility. They're just like a gas. But the next stage after a plasma on these different stages of matter, past a gas, plasma, and then you get coherent matter, is when the plasma has some sort of containment field. Now, excuse me, is it Stephanie?
Victoria.
Victoria, excuse me, Victoria.
I don't care.
Victoria, yeah.
You can call me anything.
No, I thought Victoria. I talked to a lot of people every day. Victoria, so the thing is, what nature is really designed for, these self-sustaining fields are these magnetic monopoles, something else that Paul Dirac talked about. These sort of naturally created magnetic confinement fields, which can happen spontaneously and is known as ball lightning. And some people, call them fractal toroids, as
Right.
some people do it. Martin Fleischmann Memorial Project, Bob Greenyer, and others. It's something that goes back to John Archibald Wheeler. He called them geons, geomagnetic entities. I forgot. He called them geons. These have been known for a while. They're like donuts, magnetically shaped donuts. So nature has this way of creating it. The reason we haven't talked about this a lot, Victoria, is because this is the stuff of special access programs. If John Wheeler was talking about this in the 50s as a propulsion system, because through the center of that donut, that magnetically confined natural shape, the toroid,
Right.
if he was talking about 50s and it's not talked about much, I think it just went into black programs, Air Force propulsion special access programs, because this is really the key to everything, because that's the nature, it seems to be, of ball lightning, orbs, and so forth, artificially created luminous objects. The Russians have a lot of experience with this. Shek Paranov, and a lot of other Russian researchers have talked about how to create, like Tesla did, this artificial ball ball lightning in a lab. So once you can get the confinement field, if you could kind of amp it up enough, it would begin to create its own self-sustaining system. The challenge has been once you create that orb, that ball lightning, it begins to transmute elements around it, including the containment vessel it's in. It kind of self-destructs the containment vessel, and it creates nucleonic transmutation, as a lot of researchers have found out. Takeaki Matsumoto, Ken Childress. So it's a fascinating area, and it starts to border on what we call the paranormal, because you get the same sort of effects. You get those sudden temperature changes. Generally, things go cold. You find around haunted places and Sasquatch sightings and UFOs. I've spoken to some of these witnesses. They had to put their down jacket on in the summer. You read this case after case around Bigfoot sightings and so forth. It seems to me there's a coherent matter element in some of these paranormal phenomena, which is why I call it dark matter monsters, because once you have these toroidal shapes and coherency, some researchers have suggested it begins to interact with some types of dark neutrinos that we don't detect very often. Other types of matter come to the fore, and it's a really interesting area. It does seem that there's a whole range of heavy magnetic particles that really come out of Maxwell's equations. James Clerk Maxwell, who discovered the math to verify Faraday, and from the 1800s, who discovered electromagnetism induction. You know that if you put a wire through a magnetic field, it generates electricity. And it was Maxwell that created the formulas that explain the symmetry between electricity and magnetism. And it's what's responsible for all of our technology. Right. But researchers like David Freiberger from the Stanford Linear Accelerator and others, funded by Department of Energy. I've been reading David Freiberger's paper. It says, thanks for a generous grant from DOE. And it's about alternate solutions to Maxwell's equations, which Freiberger says would end up creating particles we haven't detected yet, but it's an extension of Maxwell's math called diality rotation. And he says that's what creates ball lightning. He creates particles. And I think this is why you get this around Bigfoot, UFOs. It's a lot to talk about, guys, but I think this all of this is it's basically they're alternate symmetries, Maxwellian symmetries that we've never really explored. Fractal versions of this. The Russians, Victoria, let's say one thing. Zverbelis Nevesky, two Russian physicists, a physicist and a mathematician, saw this invisible ball lightning in an experiment, in some KGB experiment in a Moscow basement. And Zverbelis couldn't figure this out. And he realized they were looking at invisible ball lightning. The machines were detecting something that there was no machines anywhere. It was in the air. It was right in this space. You could detect it like a ghost. He called it a phantom. We don't hear about these things because they're part of these secret classified research programs. But he concluded the same thing as Freiberger. It's some sort of internally focused fractal electromagnetism of rings within rings, but going down smaller and smaller level all the way to the quantum field, and it's tapping into that energy. Sorry to say so much, Victoria.
Okay. One quick question, and I'll let you go because I know I've been talking all the time. Okay, if someone was able to control that, like the ball lightning and all the magnetism and the quantum containment, all that kind of stuff, could they possibly learn how to disrupt that field and almost through like remote viewing, use it as a weapon?
Yes, I think it can be weaponized. I'm sure this is what the Lockheed Martin patent talks about, is using this for a directed energy weapon. Why else would you?
Anytime you get the government involved, it's how can we weaponize it?
They got to weaponize it. Like Skinwalker Ranch hitchhiker effect. There's got to be some sort of, they're going to get you in your bed at night,
Well,
that's what
I work for the government.
That's what gets money going. You, Mike, you worked in the Air Force. You know how it works. Okay.
Yep. Absolutely.
So we got to have a threat. But look, that's not all they do. But they said it could be communication. We could use it for teleportation. All these weird it's called the Ron Bohm effect, by the way. It's the natural extension of these types of things we're talking about. It's action at a distance, not regular electromagnetic fields. We're talking about long distance communication in the absence of a measurable electromagnetic field, kind of like this electromagnetic phantom that Javerbalis and Vesky talk about in the Bagel Game paper. Yeah, it's definitely something that could be used to direct energy at a distance, but through what? Frequency. We're talking about controlling something at a distance by controlling its frequency with coherency. In other words, Victoria, it's like minimal energy, but maximal coherence. You kind
So
of
that's how
understand
they.
this? We're used to stuff
totally.
like this. I used to, do, with my paper money, I'd buy like shortwave radio. Mom let me put up a big antenna across the house and all shortwave radio. I mean, that's not a huge frequency. It's something, but it can go around the world. You can get the signal from the other countries. Nowadays, we're using internet, which is more coherent, but even less power, really, in some way, because it's just going down. You get hundreds of signals around this wire, maybe through fiber optics. It's coming between us, right? Just through coherency. So the more coherency you have, the less energy you need. And that's what we're talking about, is increasing the coherency to the point where you can actually affect things at a distance. And I mean, I think that's how these Bigfoot type creatures do this too. I think they just know about, they're sort of naturally good at this sort of creating this coherency through.
So
I
were
don't
the
know why they know it
pyramids?
and we don't, but they seem to do it. They seem to.
Were the
They-
pyramids built by frequencies?
It's a good question, but I mean, that's one way that you could perhaps move really heavy stones.
Okay.
Because once, and they talked about this in the Lockheed Martin patent, is once
read
you
that.
get that coherent matter wave, it creates its own gravitational field.
Okay.
Right? It creates its own field, and
No, we're getting down toward the end, so I want to grab some of the
Sure,
questions here from the chat room. So Connor Marcico, 'cause we've been talking about Bigfoot, ball lightning, these sorts of things. So orbs in the woods. Do you think Bigfoots are in the same category as the fairy realm?
I think so. People see little people also.
Yeah.
Bugwas.
Oh, absolutely.
That's the Northwest Coast Indians called them. And when I read these accounts of cryptids and people talk about these little people, and just like, was it Marcico? Yeah, Connor.
Connor.
They have these, it's something you thought was a fairy tale. They wear these little hats and these little leather skin uniforms and these little shoes, but at a foot, small scale or even smaller. But the descriptions from witnesses are so consistent. Perhaps it's rare, but they're doing some of the same things that the Bigfoot can do to transmute energy, affect things at a distance. Because, those little people were considered by the Indians to be more fearful than Bigfoot, right?
Right.
They're because they work as a group, they're fast. And when people see these Bigfoot moving at these speeds and lifting things, it just seems way out of proportion, even though they're huge. It just seems just like they're accessing energy in a different way. And the little people seem to do it too. And yes, I've read enough to be convinced they're real. I haven't seen them. I haven't even seen a Bigfoot that I can remember, but I think, yeah.
Yeah, I think we find enough in our historic literature or even legends that have been passed down, like the native Inuit in Alaska talk about the Irchinhat, the fairy stories that come out of like Ireland or England or Wales.
Right.
They're in many cases, they're talking about taking people into another realm where time works differently. Yeah, which is a lot of what we've been talking about.
Discussion at the beginning of the show about time. I'm glad you brought that up, Mike, because that's exactly what people report. A fog came in, that typical fog, the temperature changed. All of a sudden they couldn't find their family or friends that they were hiking with in what just seemed like an ordinary trail a few minutes ago. And then all of a sudden they're in different places. Exactly. Those little people, this is new to me too. I'm not like an expert in this, seem to be able to affect your sense of where you are. People report this extreme sense of fear or discomfort of being relocated temporarily to another place and coming back. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you hear these interesting stories of when, first of all, they're the terrible ones. People go missing in the woods, but some of those people come back and they will talk about how, I just heard a noise off on the side of the path. I took 2 steps out there. I didn't see what was making the noise, turned around, go get back on the path, and it was gone.
That's
and now they're
what
lost in the woods.
I have read stories like that. Some of them happened right around Boulder, Colorado, where I live, right up on the trails
Mhm.
there. They just encountered something that didn't seem like it fit. All of a sudden, everything looked strange. They couldn't remember where they were, and then it comes back again. But it's like there are these realities sandwiched together, like you're saying in your
Mhm.
model, and there's all of a sudden this contact, right?
Yeah.
And you're coming into. They're better at this than you are, so they pull you into their world. And maybe that's where some people go that we don't find again.
Yeah, wherever that other world is, some other realm, some other dimension. So, and we don't have a lot of time left here, but we do have the after show for those. So for those that are members of
Yeah,
the Connected Universe portal,
it's
we can talk a little
fascinating
bit more
stuff,
about that.
guys. I'm sorry,
Yeah.
this is totally fascinating, and it's just
Yeah.
physics. Nobody told us about this. They told us
Yeah.
this was weather balloons and swamp gas.
Right.
This is real, and it's what makes it. My view as a sociologist, what makes it
Mhm.
seem paranormal is our inhibitions to talk about it because we're afraid of ostracism and seeming weird to other people.
Right.
If
So
we can talk about this openly,
your
we're like,
view on
this
the
is all an extension
multiverse
of
here?
Maxwell's equations.
Yeah. So your view on the multiverse here? What do
Yeah,
you think?
I think that's what I think explains a lot of this. It's not
Mhm.
only this, what's called dissociative identity disorder used to be called multiple personality. I mean, I've spoken to
Well,
people who've worked in hospitals. They've seen their patients change body form and shape and temperature
mhm.
in seconds. They said it's impossible unless something else is going on to explain this. Like the person's in multiple realities, which is why they have multiple personalities, because their
Yeah.
bodies are changing too at the same time.
Yeah, it's really
Physiological.
fascinating.
Yeah. So I do think it goes back to John Wheeler's graduate student who invented the multiverse theory, Hugh Everett.
Yeah.
I mean, this is where Hugh, I'm not sure he said he was about 70% confident with
Mhm.
one of his friends that it worked that way. But there's some version of that seems to be real. When things come into our reality, that's a good way to talk about it, at least. Yeah. It's a good way to talk about it. I think that's sort of how it works.
Great. So on that note, we're going to go ahead and wrap
Thanks.
up the public broadcast of this. Those that are part of the Connected Universe portal, hang on there. We'll have our after show for everybody else. And for those that are listening to the podcast version of this later, please tune in every Wednesday night. We're actually doing this a day later because of all the crazy weather on the East Coast. But join us every Wednesday night, 8:00 p.m. Eastern time, except for the next 2 weeks, because I'll be traveling.
I'll be traveling.
ConnectUniversePortal.com. There we go. So, all right. Until next time, if time really exists.